I've just realized that I've been pronouncing this person's name wrong for the whole time that I've known him, which is like 5 years. So I owe some sort of penance. But anyways, I've seen this guy talk at a few conferences. I've been lucky enough to be a part of an event called Major Level Creative over the past long time, and that is where all the creative directors from Major League Sports get together and have a little conference. And Todd has spoken many years in a row. A lot of the things that he has done in his life have certainly blown my mind and certainly been a part of nostalgia for me, and I'm going to assume for you guys as well. So hopefully you guys can learn something about design and creativity for your businesses and how to make things look a little bit more timeless. Todd Radom, welcome to the stage.
Bowden, Bowden, you know.
Thank you.
We don't even have a lot of letters. How bad get? But thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I am Todd Radom, and I am a designer. I am an illustrator. I'm a typographer. I'm a branding consultant, an author, an influencer, and a writer. And, you know, first of all, being here together, considering what the world has been like for the last year and a half, it just feels so good. So thank you for being here. The fact that every one of us has our own journey. All of our journeys lead us to this room and this place, and it is just great to be together. So thank you. It's been a great couple of days. So my story, first and foremost, I come from a family of artists. And this informs just about everything in my life. My great-grandfather, Daniel Radom, he was a letterer, like a sign painter. He was a muralist. He was a painter, and you know, I didn't know him, but this is a lettering book of his that I own, very treasured thing. This is from 1919. He literally took walk-in commissions. So if somebody walked in off the street, he would do their portrait, which is kind of badass. That's like quite a challenge. His son, this would be my grandfather, Isle Radom. This is one of his illustrations. He was a painter. He was a fine artist. He was an illustrator. He made a living being a creative person. And some of my fondest memories are watching him paint. Being a little kid, watching him paint, meticulously dressed. He wore a tie, he smoked a pipe, and he painted. And certainly some of the most formative creative memories of mine involve going with him to museums as a kid in New York City. He gave me my first drafting kit when I was 12 years old. I still have it. I don't use it anymore, but you know, it all comes back to this. His wife, my maternal grandmother, Pearl, was a very skilled designer in her own right, an illustrator. She attended Parsons School of Design in New York City, but unfortunately she graduated into the Great Depression, and a career in the arts, particularly for a young woman at that time, was not in the cards. But she remains the most creative person I have ever known, lived a long creative life, and inspires me to this day. These are some of her notebooks from Parsons, renderings, architectural furniture renderings, this kind of stuff. I'm lucky to have this stuff. Additionally, their son, Carl, my father, was kind of a creative jack of all trades. He was at various times a designer, an illustrator, a photographer, an art director, a copywriter. So, you know, I always like to say that my role models were all around me growing up. I have a brother who's a very skilled photographer, a photo retoucher, started out doing it old school, airbrushes, and, you know, obviously has done it digital for all these years. I have a cousin who is an internationally acclaimed jazz drummer. So all of this, it's coursing through my DNA. So when I was a kid, I was not necessarily a great or even a very good athlete. But I looked at sports through perhaps a little bit of a different lens. I watched games, I observed what the teams were wearing. I looked at things like uniforms and logos, and this is at a time long before the internet existed, so I would write away to teams, and they would send me back stuff with logos, decals, scorecards, little pocket schedules, things with logos. And this inspired me. My parents bought me a silkscreen kit. I was probably 13, 14 years old. So I would squeegee up t-shirts for me and my friends of Montreal Canadiens and Boston Bruins logos. This is well before you could buy this stuff. So we all speak the same language, and I'm a print guy, deep in my heart. I went to ball games with my dad, and I kept score, and I would doodle. And all these years later, my work has appeared on the uniforms of each of these teams, and a couple of these logos I have replaced in their entirety. So, what do? I went off to art school in New York City. I'm a New Yorker, but I went to School of Visual Arts, September of 1982. And for my first 2 years, I lived in that building over there to the right, the Sloan House YMCA, 34th Street and 9th Avenue, in a 6 by 10 foot room. So all these years later, these are now luxury rentals. I had to look this up in anticipation of this discussion. A 2-bedroom apartment now goes for $5,150 a month at the Sloan building. If they only knew what transpired in those rooms. Now, these were the beginning years of the crack epidemic in New York. This was a city with a rapidly failing transit system. It was a dirty city. It was a dangerous city. There were more than 2,000 murders a year in New York City in 1982. So not the easiest environment to navigate as a college student. No campus where I went to school necessarily, no dorms, but my experiences there and the people I met at this kind of golden age were incredibly fulfilling in retrospect, tough, but I met some amazing creative people doing amazing creative things. I went to Keith Haring's first gallery exhibition in New York City. I met fine artists, photographers. We did ungodly things. And this was kind of a golden era and pretty remarkable time to be a young artist. And some of the work I did in school tracks kind of what I've done for all of these years. It was all done by hand, of course, back then. It was pre-digital. For those of us who remember such an age, it was a lot of cutting and pasting and drawing, and hand skills were valued and necessary. I explored the history of baseball, all of this ephemera, good stuff. This is a painting, a 3-foot-long painting. So this stuff interested me from way back. I imagined a baseball-themed magazine as part of a layout project. And this is all hand-drawn. Magic markers, marker skills, this is what it was. So almost 4 decades later, I'm the chairman of the board of the School of Visual Arts Alumni Society, and so I'm involved with the interests of 38,000 of the most influential creative people in the world, all over the world. So think about my ID from 1982, kind of dirtbag college kid to all these years later. It's kind of a weird journey. So I graduated SVA in 1986. I went to work in book publishing. And I worked in a department that cranked out book covers. We were just cranking out book covers. I worked on things like Stephen King book covers, glamorously. There were a lot less glamorous titles that I worked on. But again, this being a hand letterer, being involved with printing, knew all this stuff and was just all over it. And I was given sports and baseball titles. Of course, give it to Todd. He loves this stuff. He knows what he's doing. And at the same time, I was taking on a lot of freelance work, very typically for ad agencies, other book publishers. And I accrued a portfolio of sports-driven stuff. Now, this was a very interesting time because the late 80s, early 90s, particularly in New York City, licensing of sports stuff started to boom. You had all of these expansion teams coming on board, and logos being put on stuff required a new and more professionalized approach by teams and leagues. So at that time, I had heard about the fact that Major League Baseball was starting up its first in-house creative department, and I dropped my portfolio off. In those days, you literally had a portfolio. It was a box. Your stuff was in there, and you would drop it off on, we take drop-offs on Tuesday mornings, something like that. And you'd usually get a note back that says, if there's anything interesting, we'll get back to you. And MLB got back to me, and I got my foot in the door, and it's been in that door ever since then, and that was 1991. So I started to work with MLB, NBA, left my last full-time job in 1990. My boss moved all of the furniture out of my tiny little office, so it was kind of a sign that it was time to go do my own thing, and I have worked by myself for myself ever since. So, for the last 30 plus years, I designed for people that I call the most passionate brand loyalists on earth, sports fans. And, I always note the fact that the work that we do is scrutinized. There are people who design logos for banks or consumer brands, and usually, not always, people don't go to these extremes with logos for things like banks. Here's a tattoo of somebody's, of a Cleveland Browns logo I did back in, I think, 2002. But the reason I put it in here is because that was my bulldog, Casey, who I remember all these years later. And the fact that somebody in Cleveland has a tattoo of Casey is kind of a neat thing. So it's no surprise that sports fans are into their uniform designs. But some people take this to, again, a whole nother level. So, speaking of the ageless Tom Brady, I designed the logo for Super Bowl 38. And when we talk about sports branding, the rollout, the scalability of it, just the kind of stuff that it's attached to, makes it different from designing for any other kind of consumer brand. The Super Bowl itself builds itself as the largest one-day sporting event on earth, and literally the logo goes on the side of a building. Every flaw is just outsized, if there are flaws. It needs to translate into being painted on grass, and there are literally hundreds of millions of eyeballs on this thing at kickoff and throughout the game, and in the snap of a finger, it's gone. It's going to be reduced to minimal form, 2 colors, has to be stamped into leather. It's reproduced in, again, an astounding array of things. 1 color, stamped into a belt buckle. There's always a weakest link in the chain when it comes to sports logos, and my hand skills and having done mechanicals back in the old days, back on on illustration board, informs best practices. I always think that one particularly critical test of a logo is, what does it look like on a cake? Looked pretty good. I don't know if it tasted good, but the logo held up, right? Some other work of mine. I created the visual identity for the Los Angeles Angels. This was back in 2001 for the 2002 season. And I have found throughout this very long career that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. The Angels take this logo, they win the World Series for the first and only time, and they have utilized this logo ever since. So, right place, right time. The Washington Nationals were born in 2005 when the Montreal Expos moved to Washington. This was kind of an unprecedented situation in my career. Usually sports identities roll out over the course of a year and a half, right? This was done in a month, so very unusual situation. I love to travel. I love history, I love sports, so quite often I am called upon to create logos that commemorate first and last seasons. Certain great events, places. So I've had the good fortune to have done things like the closing logo for the original Yankee Stadium as a New Yorker. Very great thing to be involved with. The inaugural season logo for the current Yankee Stadium, Shea Stadium's final season. This is where I saw my first game as a kid when I was 7 years old. Opening and closing logos for St. Louis, so you get the idea. But the thing about all of these, I think that there is something that informs what I do all the time, and that is the fact that every fan base is different. In a rapidly homogenizing world, right, where every place looks the same, fan bases are different. Kansas City isn't St. Louis necessarily, even though they're close by. New York certainly isn't LA. Atlanta is not Minneapolis, et cetera, et cetera. So each one is sort of tailored to, hit the heart of the sports fan in a certain place. And accordingly, being a lover of history, I've gotten the opportunity to create logos that celebrate events, anniversaries, 10s, 25s, 50s, 60s for teams like the Lakers, the Mets, the Yankees, the Astros, just on and on and on. And, quite often these things are, again, deployed in a variety of ways. They've got to be embroidered as sleeve patches, for instance, on baseball uniforms. They're put on Coke bottles. They're put on merch, the likes of which, you guys deal with all the time. But they get big, they get small, they need to rotate. It's really changed quite a bit over the past several years, to say the least. Logos for athletes. Derek Jeter's final season logo, Big Papi's final season logo in Boston, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of my favorites is the one at upper left, commemorating the historic 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's historic MLB debut. Broke the color barrier. This was done in 1997. This appeared on the uniforms of every major league team. And being a student of history extends to being a student of design history. And I've done a ton of apparel stuff over the years. This is where we speak the same language. Licensed stuff, things that go beyond just logos. And for instance, a series of t-shirt designs involving Dodgers. Historically, 1959, first World Series victory after the club moved from Brooklyn to LA. Looks like 1959. I created the first set of licensed merch for the NBA when they opened up their retail store in New York City in the late 90s, hardwood classics. And sometimes I'll, kind of like become a time traveler. If I was a designer in 1915 and I was being asked to do a World Series logo for the Boston Red Sox, this is what it would look like. It would be one color, it would be flat, it would have been done by hand. So spanning these eras definitely helps. Some other retro-inspired creations that span the ages. Kind of fun. Love typography, love creating letter forms. Again, started out as a hand letterer, so everything comes full circle. I am called upon quite often to create visual identities for big events, all-star games, and these are quite different because these are really hot market events. They come and they go, and they are consigned to history, and they are hyper-local in a lot of ways. Here's the official logo for the 2014 MLB All-Star Game, which was played in Minneapolis. And research, which I love to do. Sometimes you'll have this epiphany moment, hopefully at the beginning of the process. And the skyline of Minneapolis, I did a on-field tour with the Twins. I saw the skyline, I walked out of the home dugout, I said, that's gonna be the logo. And there it is. It's the official logo for the 2016 MLB All-Star Game, which was played in San Diego. And of course, if you're gonna do an All-Star Game logo for Washington, D.C., like I did in 2018, it's gotta have the Capitol Dome. And quite often, again, given the activations that are involved with these things, going above and beyond the logo is necessary. Just a whole series of assets is the way I would look at it. So I created a font, an actual keyable font that dovetailed with the visual identity, and it was quite handy, and everything rolled out very nicely. It's my logo for the World Baseball Classic, which is something a little bit different. So we're here in Chicago. In 2017, the Chicago White Sox commissioned me to do what worked out to be a bear of a project. And this was a great fun thing, even though it was a lot of work. Their season ticket design. So there were 81 basically little pieces of art that tracked the entire history of the Chicago White Sox from 1901 right up to 2017. And in each one, I did some custom typography, some original illustration, took some old program covers, dovetail photography with some, period graphics, and they were very well received. Again, a lot of work. They came in this very luxe box, which the high rollers, felt like they were being given, well, not given, they had purchased something very special. And critically, I'm always thinking, again, modularly, big activation things. The stuff was deployed in a variety of ways, including a yearbook cover, on cups and note cards and T-shirts. And, I still get stuff on Twitter. People say, I love that Dick Allen T-shirt that you did. Still wear it, so very cool. And, actually, so with that thing, it was selected by the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown as part of their permanent collection, which is really quite a great honor. Big Three basketball. So I have been responsible for pretty much anything and everything visual for this league since it started in 2017. And it's been a long career, but this is unquestionably the most immersive project that I have ever been involved with. So, Big Three, for those who are not familiar, 3-on-3 professional basketball league, co-founded by entertainment icon Ice Cube. It's played on a half court, so it's a little bit different. Travels from week to week, 6 games each week, 10 weeks total, including the postseason. There are 12 teams. They're not based in cities. Games are broadcast live on CBS, and there's a lot of star power and a lot of sizzle when you go to the games. And starting in season 1, this is just a partial list of what I was tasked with, literally creating everything, starting with the league logo, court design, initial 8 teams, blah, 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 uniforms, sourcing stuff. And I couldn't have done this when I was younger, but at the, at a certain age, in my 50s, all of a sudden I'm asked to do this, and, I know a sublimation house who could take on uniforms. I know, it's gathering together our allies and utilizing that knowledge. And I've always felt that, doing stuff, that's hard. But, the stuff that's up here after all these years, it's I know how to handle it. So, Big Three games are played in NBA arenas, pre-COVID and post-COVID. We'll get back there. This is at the American Airlines Center in Dallas. You can see it's a packed house, and look at that court. It is a half court. So it is very, it looks great on broadcast, very concentrated piece of real estate. Here's the United Center, not too far from where we are right now. I'm somewhere down there on the court over there. And here's the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. So, a lot of star power on a very small court. So again, this is a very unique league. The teams, as I said, not based in specific locations. So creating the identities for these, starting from scratch, it required a bit of a different mindset. The way to differentiate these things, these teams, and hopefully set up some possibilities for rivalry was done via color. So a team like the Ghost Ballers is purple, the Aliens are, as they should be, lime green, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I created a pretty, deep set of visual assets for these teams. Something for everyone, something for licensees, something for broadcast. Logos that can move, motion graphics are so important. So you've got primary logos, you've got secondary logos, you've got word marks, one color variations, which are so important, and every team has 3 different uniforms. So here we go, color, color, color. Even customized the numbers for each team. Some are wider, some have thicker outlines, some have no outlines. So the teams look different from one another. And again, starting from scratch, great challenge. Designed the official game ball, the fireball. And I'm a very clever human being, and you can see that the B is actually a 3. 3-on-3 basketball, look at that. I designed the court, as I said, which is a really interesting challenge. I mean, it's got to look good on TV. Small piece of real estate, certain number of bodies moving around on this thing, and the colors of the court change from year to year. So I look at it as sort of a canvas against which all of the action takes place. This was the court for the first 2 years, and you can see we have these 4-point circles, 4-point play. Guys chucking them from deep, right? And these are actually advertising opportunities. We had Toyota come in with RAV4, so we've got the RAV 4-point circle. Good opportunity to sell. So gives you an idea of what we're looking at. We've got ads on court now, so got to fill the bag. So I get to work with this gentleman here, Ice Cube. He is a visionary, he is a creative force, and again, everything I do on this incredibly immersive project goes directly through him. Now, you guys might know Ice Cube as a rapper, founding member of NWA, maybe you know him as an actor, but you probably don't know that before he hit big in all of these things, he went to college for 1 year as a young man to study architectural drafting, okay? So he has a unique understanding of design and how this stuff gets rolled out and presentation. So when he and I talk logos, when we talk about court design, we talk the same language because it's really about spatial relationships and composition, and we go back and forth about it, and he gets it. We talk the same language. He said, what I learned from architectural drafting is that everything has to have a plan to work. You can't just wing it. I can't get all the materials I need for a house and just start building. Whether it's a career, family, life, you've got to plan it out. And so many of the conversations that we've heard these couple of days kind of track what he talks about with this. And I certainly know that that's the case in my own life and in my career. His initial reach out to me was one of respect and optimism. We're lucky to have your expertise and enthusiasm. Glad we're moving in the right direction. This is going to be fun. And when I say it's an immersive relationship, I mean it. So I did a search through my inbox, and this is just emails, 6,565. So if you're going to work with somebody that tightly, it better work. It's no different than a marriage or any other kind of close personal relationship.
Yo, what's up? This your homeboy Ice Cube, co-founder of the Big Three. And as you know, I've worked with my man Todd. I call him the Todd Father. Now, we worked on everything from the first logo, the league logo, to all the teams, to the court, to the signage. Me and this dude been connected at the hip for 3-4 years now. And man, I love it. I mean, you know, the design, the colors, the logos. I mean, when I work with Todd, he usually sends me, 7, 8, 9 different, versions of the logo. So, I mean, we work it out, beat it out. I send him back, I like this part, let's work on this, let's work on that. He always send me back another 5, 6 samples of what the newer version could be. And it's just been an amazing, dream come true. It's like, to me, it's like I'm working with Dre. When I come up with a concept, I know I'm putting it in the right hands, man. So, Todd, you my man. Keep doing this, baby. Anytime I need a logo, I don't care. Give it goddamn. Anytime I need a logo, I'm getting it from you, baby. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, a very wise man once said, work can often seem transactional, a means to an end. Working with those who appreciate what we do serves to elevate the enterprise as well as ourselves. And that wise man was me. So, we've all had heartburn throughout our careers. We've heard stories of them. We encounter it on a day-to-day basis. It's never seamless, but working with people who we love and respect and who love us back, and when the work is fun, it makes it all worthwhile. So early in the first season for Big 3, I was tasked with designing and sourcing out a championship trophy, right? Make us a championship trophy. It's not that easy. So I was very lucky. I looked at form and function trophies, the Larry O'Brien NBA championship trophy, looked at the Super Bowl trophy, looked at the World Series trophy, looked at the World Cup trophy, and thinking about how this thing can extend into branding opportunities as well. I was very lucky. I found a small shop in Smithfield, Rhode Island. They produced the Kentucky Derby Trophy. Incredible craftspeople. And I may be biased, but I think Big 3's trophy is one of the most handsome in all of sports. Looks great on TV, feels valuable. It is. It's really quite an object. And again, to have this kind of credibility behind a startup league was necessary. No corners cut. So depicting the trophy within the context of the branding, again, very necessary thing. This is our championship this year. It's played in Nassau in the Bahamas. So this whole ocean theme was kind of cool. And there's the trophy right there in the branding. And when a winning team hoists it to the rafters, the thing weighs 30 pounds, by the way. Okay, so like engineering thing, it's really quite something. So anyway, very cool. So I'm very grateful for my relationship with Big 3, with Cube, with all of our sponsors who fill the bag, make it work. Again, immersive, but enjoyable, and just a great thing to be involved with. All right, so additionally, I'm an author. My current book, Fabric of the Game, the stories behind the NHL's names, logos, and uniforms, I co-wrote with my buddy Chris Creamer, who is up in Toronto. So this was a great project. We wound up splitting the writing task, but I tasked myself with designing the book itself, kind of like, relearned InDesign, and did 50 or so original illustrations for the thing. So this was really fun. And it's currently in its third hardcover printing and just keeps selling. Hard to sell a book in the middle of a pandemic. Hard to make a book in the middle of the pandemic. What do we hear about no glossy paper anywhere in the world right now? Flat paper, right. And this is printed in China. So, the book arrives at the port of Los Angeles and sits there for 30 days, and then it has to get on a train and go to a warehouse and, but anyway. Some more illustrations from the book. My first book, Winning Ugly, a visual history of baseball's most unique, air quotes, uniforms. So part of what I do, like I said earlier, is research. And in researching, I found that people have always had opinions about sports logos and uniforms, right? Love or hate. 1908, a letter to the editor of Sporting Life, or this is the New York Tribune within Sporting Life. Within the last few years, there has been a tendency toward the garish in baseball uniforms, 2 words, baseball. There's too much of this insignia and curlicue business. The only really artistic diamond apparel brought out in recent seasons was that of the Pittsburgh Club. So just take this and transpose it into the year 2021 and put it on Twitter and put an F-bomb in there, and things don't change. People care about this stuff. These are the people with the tattooed heads, right? They care about their logos and uniforms. Here's another one I found, 1909. Uniforms worn by players not made for style or beauty. Baseball comparisons are odious. So are baseball uniforms. Really, baseball uniforms are the ugliest things in the world. So my mother always said that, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. And this has always been the case. But we kind of, thrive on this. So the book contains, a history of the baseball uniform, including some of the most, and again, air quotes, questionable. But being a child of the 70s, I was very lucky because I grew up at this time when sports logos and uniforms were very expressive. And the Astros uniform that was launched in 1975, looking at these sublimated jerseys, right? Often imitated, never duplicated, the OG originals. Here are the San Diego Padres jerseys of the early 80s. Steve Garvey, who famously played for the Dodgers at first, went to the Padres as free agent, said, I used to play baseball and look like an American flag. Now I look like a taco. And finally, the Chicago White Sox in the 70s, in the early 80s, wore these like collared things that shrunk in the wash. But anyway. So additionally, I do media appearances. Do we have any hardcore baseball fans here? All right, there you go. Some of you, I don't know if you're listeners, but I appear every week, Friday mornings on the ESPN Baseball Tonight podcast. I've done that for about 7 years, and I'll do a different theme every week, every year. I do a quiz, and it's kind of fun. And I go on TV and I talk about how much the Mets suck. I literally, in this segment right here, I said, Mets gonna Met, and it's true. So my writing includes the New York Times asked me to write an op-ed about why I love ugly uniforms. And I had to really dig down deep because loving something requires some, how do you explain that in a New York Times piece? But anyway. So again, so many of these things that I've had the great privilege to be involved with. It's been a meandering career, all creative, all these things, and all roads lead us to this room right here today. We're out of time, but hopefully there's some time for some questions. Thank you. Don't be shy. Yeah.
You've been through so many eras of types of media and creating media.
Yeah.
How did you know that your skills needed to progress? Did you do that before it happened, or did you do it as it?
Yeah, it's actually, like I said, super core to additional, in addition to the DNA part. So again, I started out at a time when it was cut and paste, and I made a pretty good living as a young designer in New York. The economy happened to be pretty good, doing hand lettering, working with ad agencies, working on like blue chip stuff. So all of a sudden things become digital, and it kind of was all of a sudden. This was in about 1991 or 92, and I'm like, I'm gonna just ride this wave, until it washes out. And of course, so I had to learn, how to use a Mac. I had this gigantic CRT thing, my first setup. I had a scanner, I had a giant monitor, I had a one-color laser printer, I had Adobe Illustrator 88, all this stuff. It cost like $14,000 in 1991 dollars. And I feel very fortunate all these years later because I do span these two eras. This first era informs good practices, as I said earlier, with this, and I could see how things move, and I'm also, a voracious consumer of social media these days. So, kind of keeping, you like to think that you're ahead of trends, but just being a creative person is always about observing what's out there and hopefully taking the best of it and pushing it forward and pushing your own work forward. So, yeah.
Who's your favorite team? Baseball, favorite team?
I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, even though I grew up 6 miles north of Yankee Stadium. I'm feeling the pain of what happened last night. So, yeah.
Braves fan.
Well.
Dodgers fan.
Oh.
Roommates.
Wow. What's happening right now? How does that work?
See.
Managing relationships, always right? Well, I have friends who work for both teams, hoping the Dodgers win tonight, so let's get to a 7th game and
Go Braves.
well, we'll see what happens. I'm being diplomatic. Yeah.
Do you think that your analog skills make you a better artist for digital?
No question. No question.
By the way, I live in Boston and I hate them.
Yeah, again, it was not an easy process for those of us who remember back then how to, I'll explain what it was like to print a poster. Not screen print a poster necessarily, but set something up to send to the printer. You'd have to send out for body copy. It was expensive. You'd have to wait. But on the other hand, we had more time to do it because it was like this magical process that nobody understood. Remember I talked about working in book publishing. We had this department, party hard department in a little loft area, right? And these editors would come up with jobs, and we'd say, come back in 3 days, and we would make magic. So anyway, I think about it every day, and I think it's amazing because particularly now there are people doing actual hand lettering, like these kind of hand skills that I loved doing all those years ago. Younger people are actually doing and doing incredible things with. So I guess everything comes full circle, and if you live long enough, hopefully you're going to see it come full circle. So it's an interesting time. Yes.
So your work is magnificent, and I really appreciate it. When, as a designer, I design, and one of the things that I like doing is putting my little spin and my little voice into things, and I always try to please myself first with the work. So in some of the work, some of the pieces that we saw, are there little details and things where you use some negative space or the way you twisted something or whatever that pleases you but that nobody ever sees, and you know that it's there and it tickles you because you pulled it off or whatever? Talk about that a little bit.
Sometimes, but I would always, this is what I have to say about sports branding in particular. There are so many stakeholders involved that the process from which it gets to round one of sketches to the field of play in the Super Bowl is the making of sausage, right? It is an ugly thing, and where it starts and where it finishes are usually, incredibly different. Every once in a while there's something, but at a certain point of the process, I kind of surrender to these larger forces. They're doing, on ice tests. What does this look like when, people are skating around on it or on a field of play? And that is so far out of my hands that little details like that tend to get excised with the sausage making. But I know what you're talking about, and the most beautiful, one of the most acclaimed sports logos of all time, for those who are familiar with it, is the Hartford Whalers logo. The Hartford Whalers, they're now the Carolina Hurricanes, have been for 25 years or so, but it is a W with a whale's fluke tail, and in the middle there is an H, which is formed by negative space. It's incredibly elegant, it is clever, and these days you would probably just make more outlines, give us some beveling, give us some, so. Thank you. Yeah.
Who's the one pro sports team that's just doing it the worst right now that you'd love to rebrand?
I mean, there are a few that I'll look at and I'll say, all right, you got a team that's stuck in amber. So I'll give you just, I'm mindful of it because I was there a couple of weeks ago. I was in Columbus, Ohio a couple of weeks ago. Columbus Blue Jackets, NHL team. They've been around since the year 2000. They've never changed their identity. And there's not a lot of meat on the bones. Again, the extendability and the activation of these things requires, particularly now, as I say, a robust system, right? They don't have a robust system. They've got a logo that looks like it was designed in 2000. That would be one of them. But you've got these old-time teams, the Detroit Tigers, have an Old English D on their uniforms. I've done a lot of work with the Tigers over the years. And they have worn an Old English D since they were a minor league team in the 1890s. That should never change. However, you need some additional stuff to make it whole and to serve your licensees, people who make t-shirts. That's here. People who do motion graphics, scoreboard bugs, all this other stuff. So there are a couple of them.
Do you get to do much negative space artwork?
Not really, but it's really interesting because of the fact that, you guys know this. Logos in the last several years have started to devolve tremendously because of technology and the needs of, where this stuff is rolled out. So I always say that in thinking about, question that this gentleman asked before, going digital. There's a reason why so many of our sports logos in particular were incredibly complex in the 90s. 6 colors, 3 outlines, all this stuff is because we had this brand new toy called Illustrator, and you could do anything you wanted to do, and you couldn't do that back in the days when you had to make, registered layers and acetate and all that. But then inevitably things kind of swung back towards simplification. So that kind of stuff, I think you're going to see a little more of it right now, but not quite yet. Yes.
You had that moment in Minneapolis, where you saw the skyline, and yeah, that was awesome.
Epiphany.
That happened. What's your process when maybe it doesn't come as easily, and you're like, I gotta come up with something.
Grind it out. You just gotta
Do you have
grind
a
it.
process like that? I know Marshall's got his cards that he just showed us yesterday. Do you have a process that you go through when you might be stuck?
It's, like I said, just got to grind it out. I am big on research, right? So it's not only boots on the ground research like that moment, but like just digging into, online stuff, old newspapers, whatever it's going to be. And a good example of it actually would be the Washington Nationals, which I showed before. Now, if I'm doing a logo for the Cincinnati Bengals, a tiger theme is pretty, that's a good thing. What the hell is a national? Right? How do you depict what a national is? So I'm like, it has to revolve around typography. It's got to be typographically based, and it has to have a sense of place imparted by the perhaps architecture of the nation's capital. That's where I came up with that. That's not necessarily an epiphany, it's just kind of like good judgment, but there are times when I'm just grinding through, and nothing's working, and the clock is ticking, and eventually you're gonna come up with something. And it may not be the most, some solutions, again, are obvious. Some are kind of brokered. And the obvious ones are the ones that, I'm salivating over. So the Colorado Rockies would be another logo, by the way. Speaking of, mountains. Something else with mountains. Who else? Yes?
You showed a lot of designs that you have that are timeless and stood the test of time. Are there any designs that you've done that you can speak to that haven't done that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple, but it's weird. Like back in the 90s when everybody in sports was doing snarling animals and like aggressive multi-outline thing, I kind of was known for doing elegant things with ribbons and, things that looked like they were done, in the 1880s at one point. Right? Heraldry and like cool, goth typography, which is what you would call it now. So I wasn't called to do that kind of stuff. And honestly, there was a time that I did think, I've got to, what's the, I do all this branding. Being a steward of my personal brand, I came to realize that kind of like, this is what I do well, I'm called upon to do it. Not that I'm never gonna not change, right? But it's like, go with what works. So yeah, there are some clunkers here and there, but touch wood, they're few and far between. And again, not everything ages well. I'll look at some stuff that I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and kind of like, geez, if I had the opportunity to do it all over again, everything, having this like long runway does tell me that like, some things are of their time and should be of their time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Another note that I'm a Cardinals fan, and that the 2006, the Busch Stadium opening, like I wore that logo on it.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's that. Cardinals are a great example of an organization that values design, right? Their owner loves graphic design, maybe a little bit too much, right? But, I remember working with a guy's name is Bill DeWitt III, just so into it and going through the 57th variation on how this cardinal sits on top of that tower. And I was like, all right, he cares. Like it's coming from the right place. So thank you. All right. Thank you.